off today's webinar. So first of all, on behalf of my co-facilitator Seni Navo, myself and the climate finance team, we would like to welcome you to this webinar. This is the third and the final webinar, and it has been a series of outreach webinars which is being organized in the context of the fourth biennial assessment development. So yes, my name is Vicky Nowens, for those who don't know me yet, and together with Zeni, we co-facilitate this biennial assessment. So I hope everybody is here, and now, yes, thank you. We can start to have, first of all, a look at the agenda of today. It's much more, make sure that you mute if you're not speaking, then I'll come back to the housekeeping matters in a short while. So today, today's work is basically the same as with the other webinars. We will first have a brief introduction to the biennial assessment and the overall approach to our work. Then we would like to turn to Chantal Naidu, she is one of our technical authors of the biennial assessment, and she will cover the specific topic for today's webinar. And then we follow up with a series of discussants and presenters who will all of them give their own view on today's topic, the Article 2.1c or discussion, and then we will have an open discussion. I really like to have a lot of time for the open discussion, so that's why I might go quick through the first introduction. But as I said, first of all, some housekeeping matters. So please, if you're not speaking, use audio only and keep microphones on mute. And if you are speaking, we would like you to put on your video just when you're presenting the information. Don't share any screens or files during the call. And if you wish to make an intervention, which it will be at the end of today's discussion, we kindly ask you to indicate this by using the raise your hand function or by typing your name into the chat. The Secretariat will help to make sure that we don't forget anybody who's asking for the floor. As with the other webinars, we will be recording this informal webinar and except if there are some objections to do so. But this is mainly to facilitate the development of the report, and this will also help our technical authors of the report to include your views. So that was just the housekeeping rules. Now, as all of you might already know, but just as a short, brief background, the Standing Committee on Finance is a body that serves the Convention and the Paris Agreement on climate finance matters. And we have received this mandate to develop a biennial assessment since 2011 at COP17. So at this time, this report is a fourth report biennial assessment, and this will be made available in 2021 ahead of the COP, whenever the COP might take place. So just to give you again some view on how the biennial assessment looks like. So first of all, we always have, there are two parts. So the first one is the technical report, which is the main source of information and the main work at this point. And then we also have the summary and recommendations prepared by the SCF. So the technical report is, as you might know, is being prepared by experts under the guidance of the SCF, and we draw a lot on the information and data from a range of sources, including this webinar. And we use the stakeholder input and expert review, but it's still a product from the external experts. The summary and including the recommendations are more being prepared by the SCF members and include the key findings of the biennial report or the technical report itself. Both the report and summary and recommendations are being welcomed by the COP and the CMA during the climate change conference, and then normally the recommendations are also included as an annex to the relevant decisions, which would be the report of the SCF. So as you can see on the screen on the white box, the chapter, the biennial assessment has 4 different chapters. The first one is about the methodological issues related to the transparency of climate finance. The second one provides an overview of the current climate flows 2017-2018 in this report, and also includes information on identified trends from previous years. The third one is the assessment of climate flows, considering the implications of their purpose, composition, effectiveness, access, and emerging trends relevant in the context of the UNFCCC. And the fourth report, which is what we will be looking into further today, is about, and it's also actually the first time we are having a separate chapter on this one, in line with the decision made at Katowice. And this one is about mapping information relevant to Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement. And this is also actually making sure that we comply with the SCF recommendations of 2018, which also stipulated that we should include information relevant to this article in the future biennial assessment. As mentioned before, we plan to make the biennial assessment available by mid-2021 to inform COP26. So what we've been doing so far is having a call for evidence, which is on the next slide. And this call for evidence is still available on the UNFCCC website. So responses received to date are available on the information repository on the SCF website. And of course, we would definitely like to thank all of you that have already submitted information on this. So I think this was my, I hope, quick introduction. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Chantal Naidoo, who is going to present the first presentation today. Thank you. Chantal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vicky, and good day to everybody on the line. I'm going to just go through 3 quick slides just to give you a sense of the rationale of the approach that we've taken to the chapter, and then a little bit of why. So in terms of the rationale, as you all know, there's limited guidance from the member states on approaches to 2.1c, but we also know that both in terms of public and private finance initiatives, there's been a groundswell of activity in terms of responding to Paris. And this has been growing quite significantly since the Paris Agreement itself was signed. So the approach that we've taken is to literally scope those initiatives by financial actors. And on the next slide, I will show you what I meant by financial actors. What our initial findings are is that while 2.1c speaks to consistency, a large part of the framing of the initiatives in the public and private domain is around aligning with the Paris goals. But we felt that scoping the initiatives that are out there, even though there is limited guidance from member states on how to approach 2.1c, offers us some insight to both the depth and breadth of response by the financial sector. And that gives us some indication of how perhaps the sentiment of 2.1c is being operationalized. For example, we're picking up things around the actions that are voluntary and mandatory, how different interpretations of finance flows and consistency is being applied, and also the responses in relation to the pathway of low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. From a research methodology point of view, it's a scoping review, so we're throwing the net quite wide and being able to catch what we can from data sources, as Vicky also mentioned. There's published research in some instances, not specific to 2.1c, but related, and contributing to a different financial actors' response to the Paris Agreement. There's been quite significant surveys, announcements, submissions as part of the biennial work, and then there's some very specific country examples as well. So this what stands behind the approach that we've taken, the technical approach we've taken for the chapter. In the next slide, I'd like to show you what we mean by financial actors. And the idea here was to, what we did was cluster them into national public finance, international public finance, alternative channels, the regulators and supervisors, and then the private finance. While this is not perfect, and it's part of the technical team's construction of being able to respond to this, underlying each of these kind of categories are particular groups that we've clustered together. So if we take the example of regulators and supervisors, for example, standing under that standing behind that is the central banks, finance ministries, and the related agencies. On the next slide, in a way, the reason for the scoping and why the scoping is interesting, the next slide shows us that since the 1980s, perhaps the Secretariat can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. On the next slide, it shows us why this is an interesting approach to take, because from the 1980s and then steeped up towards the progressively over time, there's definitely been a growth in sustainable and climate-related financial measures by the actors that I just showed you in the previous slide, and that's in both developed and developing countries. So we're taking a fairly empirical approach. We're trying to draw on whatever policy-related research that might be out there and how individual countries might be responding and individual actors. So for today's discussion, it would be very valuable for us as a team to receive your inputs on this approach and how to enhance it and refine it, and also make sure that we're capturing the magic that might be out there on how 2.1c is being responded to. Thank you. I'll hand back to Vicky now. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, and I'll give the floor immediately to the first speaker from outside the Biennial assessment, which is Mr. Aram Rodriguez de los Santos from the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change in Mexico. Senora Rodriguez, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. I would like to start saying that Mexico has carried out a vast amount of initiatives. Fundamentally consists of tracking climate finance exercises, methodological and scientific-based recommendations, but mostly covering the public and national and international public finance. I think we need to move on the assessment and the assessment of private sector, that considering that private sector is fundamental for fulfilling the Paris Agreement objectives. Also, the government of Mexico has adopted, with the validation of various stakeholders, a broad definition of what climate finance is in order to report, provide, mobilize, or receive climate finance flows. And regarding the topic of transparency, Mexico has undertaken actions to develop an MRV system for climate finance flow that includes guidance for an MRV of climate finance and some recommendation for the implementation of an MRV and accounting system for mitigation. Also, the government has encouraged the allocation of domestic climate finance flows in the government budget through a cross-cutting annex that covers both mitigation and adaptation actions since 2014. And at this point, the Ministry of Finance is, with the support of GGI, is in the process of accreditation of 2 national development banks to become accredited entities to access the GCF, which includes the strengthening of the environmental and social management systems, as well as the development of a pipeline of projects to be submitted to the GCF and other sources that could strengthen the climate action in the territory. At this point, it's important to promote transparency and accounting systems, such as MRV systems, that may help to provide a better understanding of the scale, distribution, needs, and use of public and private, national and international resources in order to reinforce the informed decision-making and planning on climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you already raised some very important points for the discussion time as well. So the next speaker is Caroline Wellemans from DG FISMA from the European Commission. Mrs. Wellemans, you have the floor. Is Mrs. Wellemans already online, or should we move to the next slide?
I am. Do you hear me? Sorry,
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. Thank you for inviting me to take part of your webinar, of your very interesting panel. And I'm glad to be here because making financial flow consistent with a low carbon economy and a climate resilient economy is clearly a top priority for the European Commission. So my name is Caroline Wellemans and I'm working in the European Commission in the unit responsible for sustainable finance. And the Commission has taken so far many measures to help align financial flows with the Paris Agreement objectives, and to build back also better from the COVID-19 crisis. What we also are seeing is that climate finance has grown significantly this last year, which is very positive. Green bond issuance has also grown significantly from a handful of development bank issuers to a market which was today 250 250 billion USD per year in terms of issuance. But this is clearly, even though it is very positive development, this is clearly not enough, clearly not sufficient to reach, of course, a Paris Agreement. So we need to do much more on this Article 2(1)(c). And especially if we consider how much we need to fill in the gap. I mean, the gap has been estimated by the OECD. If you want to reach the Paris Agreement objective by 2030, there is an investment need of 6.9 trillion annually. So there is a lot to do, and scaling up climate finance, scaling up green finance worldwide remains a clear challenging task. And what we believe also is that there is this is a challenge because there isn't a coherent definition of what green investments are. There is insufficient standardization, insufficient transparency. International investors need clarity about what investment can be considered as green, can be considered as Paris aligned. Of course, so markets need this guidance, and progressively more and more jurisdictions have started to develop what we call sustainable finance roadmaps, sustainable finance initiatives, trying to introduce standard labels and taxonomy. For example, China has been working now for, I think, almost 7 years on a taxonomy for different financial products in order to attract investors on green investment. In the EU, I will say a few words about that also where we stand, but we have also worked towards a taxonomy to bring clarity to investors. Markets have, of course, welcomed those developments, and this is very positive. I think it has contributed also to the growth of climate finance this last year. But we have to keep in mind that authorities have developed these initiatives reflecting their own priorities in terms of climate and environment, reflecting also the state of development of their market, so their specificities. But the risk that fragmented practices lead to insufficient financing to reach a Paris Agreement is clearly real. So we believe that to mobilize international investors and to scale up cross-border investment towards green investment, we really need to work towards integrated market, integrated green markets. What does that mean? It means to work towards coherent frameworks, coherent definition of what it is green and not green. So it is important that the definition, the labels, the standard, the taxonomy that are developed to help investors to identify where are green opportunities, green investment opportunities, are done in a coherent and very transparent way. And we believe that this will scale up significantly green investment worldwide and will also reduce transaction costs. And this is the reason why the European Union last October, together with partner countries, have decided to launch an initiative which is called the International Platform on Sustainable Finance. And the initiative is really part of the international effort to implement the Paris Agreement objective, or to meet the Paris Agreement objective, and to help in particular in regard to Article 21C, to scale up green investment, to redirect capital towards green investment at the speed and the scale required to meet these very challenging objectives. And so members of this platform have signed all together a joint statement, and in the joint statement, the members committed to cooperate internationally on sustainable finance. They recognize in this joint statement the urgent need to scale up sustainable finance, the fact that the financial sector has a clear role to play to reorient investment as provided by Article 21C of the Paris Agreement. They acknowledge also that the global nature of financial markets can help to link local needs with global sources of funding, but that coordination is needed to promote globally integrated market and foster the ability of the financial sector to support this transition. So this cooperation platform, this IPSF, now counts 40 members, and they represent altogether 50% of the global emission, 50% of the GDP, and 45% of the population. And under this platform, members exchange, compare the different initiatives, where for those who are willing, they even strive to align the initiatives. So their frameworks in terms of green standard and label, in terms of green disclosure, and in terms of green taxonomies. And what I wanted to say is this prepare also the ground for international standard setter to then afterwards, building on the work of the IPSF, working on international standard in the field of sustainable finance. Of course, the challenge of global climate change is immense and immediate. Investment needs are enormous, and we have no time to lose. We really need to coordinate. There is no other way to align our frameworks, to mobilize public and private sector towards these objectives. So, as I said, this platform focuses on taxonomy, disclosure, and standard and label, these key elements for investors to identify green investment opportunity. This is as part of the global effort the EU is doing. Within the EU, we have also developed our own tool that we are comparing under the platform, and which is, as you may know, the European taxonomy. Very recently, the co-legislator has adopted this first level legislation concerning the taxonomy. This provides a general framework, and we are now preparing the criteria for the delegated act. This taxonomy, what does it? It provides a classification of the activities that are considered as contributing significantly to one of the 6 environmental objectives without harming any other 5 environmental objectives. And the way it has been conceived is quite a very ambitious tool, because it is considered to be already aligned with with the EU ambition to reach climate neutrality by 2050. So I think it's important to really understand that it is a tool to reach our climate objective of climate neutrality by 2050. And so building on that, we are also reviewing other key elements of our sustainable finance agenda, including the green standard. We are working towards an EU green bond standard, and we are also currently reviewing what we call our disclosure requirement for companies, so that they will also provide more information about which of their activity are taxonomy compliant, so are in line with what we consider should be in terms of alignment with our climate objective by 2050. So as you may have noticed from my presentation, the EU is clearly committed to make financial flow align with a low carbon, and I would say climate neutral economy. We have done many actions inside the EU and also globally, because global challenges call for global action, and we truly believe that coordinated actions are necessary to reach our common climate objective. We are more than happy to contribute to this effort. And my last remark will be that we have recently set up a platform to continue to develop our taxonomy. And under this platform, which gather many experts, one of the mandates of this platform will be to monitor and report to the European Commission the trends within the Union about the investments that are sustainable. So investments that are aligned with our taxonomy, with our objective of climate neutrality by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wellen wants to give an overview of the work of the European Commission and European Union. The next speaker is Ms. Paola Alvarez from Department of Finance in the Philippines. Ms. Alvarez, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you and good evening from our side of the world. So for the Philippines, actually, we take climate change in consideration with disaster risk resiliency. So I don't know if other countries are doing it as well, but for the Philippines, for example, in order for us to properly have adaptation and mitigation financing, we also have to determine the proper disaster risks on the other end of the spectrum. So actually, in terms of policy, the President issued an executive order in 2017 to regroup the cabinet members to have a cabinet cluster on adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk resiliency in order for all government agencies to harmonize their policies toward climate change. So initially, what we have been doing with the Climate Change Commission is to create a national climate change action plan that maps out the different climate change actions, plans, programs, and activities for each government agency so that we may be able to achieve our nationally determined contribution draft targets. So we're still finalizing and we're supposed to submit later this year. So I think December 2020. So aside from that, we also developed together with the Climate Change Commission and our Budget and Management Department, the budget expenditure tagging, wherein all government appropriations passed by Congress are tagged by each government agency so that we can properly track how much we actually allocate towards mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk resiliency in our government budget. So using this platform, the Ministry of Finance or the Department of Finance, where I'm from, could see how much gaps in terms of financing we still need in order for us to actually lower down our carbon emissions or for us to achieve adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk resiliency. So in relation to that, recently, the Secretary of Finance was appointed by the President as chairman of the Climate Change Commission. Now, with this power, we could now actually mainstream climate change policies, not only in our fiscal policies, our macroeconomic policies, our budgeting and procurement, but also in terms of other government agencies in relation to their plans and programs. So right now, the Department of Finance is working together with the UK government with the Prosperity Fund, and is also a member of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. So our principle that we are championing is Helsinki Principle number 4, which takes climate change into account towards macroeconomic policy, fiscal policies, budgeting, and procurement. So with this policy, or with this policy statement, we actually started to green or mainstream green and sustainable financing through channeling different technical assistance towards other government agencies in order to help them actually in determining what kinds of investments they can do. So when we called on different agencies, for example, like the Energy Department, the Climate Change Commission, the Economic and Development Authority, a problem that we actually saw was that in terms of financing, the reason why, although there are a lot of available financing elsewhere, like international sources, it's hard for us to penetrate sustainable financing in certain investments because different sectors are not talking to each other with the same set of definitions. So, for example, the definition of a green energy project for the energy department is different from what the environment department determines as a green or a clean source of energy. So because of this, we actually called on other government agencies to come up with a working group that would actually create a taxonomy wherein government or other investors from public, private, local, or international could actually see what the Philippine government defines as, for example, renewable energy, what it defines as something that can be funded with adaptation funding or mitigation funding. So we're trying to come up with a common taxonomy that would be acceptable to all agencies across the different sectors. So another one that the Ministry of Finance is actually doing to help mainstream climate and sustainable finance is to come up with a sustainable finance roadmap wherein we could draft actually which projects should be could be funded with what type of funding. So for example, our Securities and Exchange Commission already adopted the ASEAN Green Bond Standards, but not all government projects could be financed 100% by, for example, foreign capital. So we have to actually determine which investment opportunities could be funded by what kind of sustainable or green financing source. So another development that we have is that our central bank actually came up with the sustainable finance framework for banks. But another issue they have is that certain banks would not lend to, for example, green or agriculture projects related to sustainability because the risk is quite high. So what we're trying to do now is to help banks determine how do you actually transition or how do you gauge risk exposure in terms of sustainable investments in relation to climate change and disaster risks. Because the Philippines is a highly vulnerable country, it would be very costly for them to lend money in these sectors. That's why we're trying to mitigate risks in form of other government policies or other government initiatives, like, for example, guaranteed loans for local governments for them to fund, for example, sustainable investments. So another funding source that we have is the People's Survival Fund. It's a fund created by the legislature, which actually allocates 1 billion pesos each year for us to fund adaptation, mitigation, and other climate change related activities. However, a problem that we saw is that not all local government units understand what is adaptation, what is mitigation, and what should be done towards disaster risk resiliency. So this is also another issue that we're trying to address through, for example, GCF readiness programs, wherein we try to train local executives or we try to host webinars in order to help them understand how to properly prepare project proposals for us to fund adaptation mitigation projects. Another issue that we also have is, although we have disaster contingency funds or disaster funds, these funds, although we regularly encounter disasters and typhoons, we're also the ones used in terms of giving aid towards the pandemic. So in order for us to actually replenish the fund, we need more sources of revenue, which is actually quite tight right now because of the ongoing pandemic. So one of the things that we're looking at to solve this problem as well is what sectors or what government programs we could turn into, for example, debt for nature swaps, or what could we include in our recovery programs to make it more green and to make it more sustainable. So these are things that we're actually trying to work with together with multilateral development partners and other bilateral partners in order for us to help not only the recovery, but to also make it more green and sustainable in order for us to attain our goals in terms of lowering greenhouse gas emissions. So aside from that, the latest development that we have is actually our Department of Energy announcing a moratorium on approval of coal or coal-related projects. So we see this actually as a green light for us to better aid our Department of Energy in crafting as well carbon pricing instruments, and in order for them to actually create policies that would enable financing towards renewable energy development. So these are things that we're actually working with them as well through different technical assistance with partners and mainstreaming in an interagency or intergovernment body that would help us communicate more for us to actually push forth for mainstreaming of sustainable and climate finance. So that's it for the Philippines.
Thank you, Ms. Alvaro. As I say, I mean, you again, and just as with the other speakers presenting more the experience from Mexico and the European Commission, I think now we have very good examples of what is important, what counts, what are the challenges of the aligning financial flows with the Paris Agreement. So thanks all three of you for the first presentation. The next three speakers are not presenting countries or the Commission, but are more giving their own from their own organization. So Daisy Streetfield from the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. You're the first speaker on this one, so please go ahead and take the floor.
Thank you, Vicky, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's great to be back presenting to the Standing Committee and seeing lots of familiar names from the UNFCCC process when I used to work on it a long time ago, back before Paris, and great to be here today to present now on behalf of the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. And for those of you who don't know too much about us, we are the European membership body for investors' collaboration on climate change, and we support our members to take action on climate change in a number of different ways through our corporate program, through our policy program, and through our investor practices program. We represent around 250 asset owners and asset managers across 15 countries with around 33 trillion of assets under management. So a substantial group of investors involved in our work. But I'm here today to talk specifically about an initiative that we set up last year in May 2019 called the Paris Aligned Investment Initiative, which was really designed to explore how investors can align their portfolios to the goals of the Paris Agreement and to really translate the objectives of the Paris Agreement into something actionable for investors. As we know, that the agreement itself is written for countries as the parties to the agreement, but obviously Article 2.1c strongly encourages alignment of all financial flows, including those of the private sector, with the goals of the agreement. And so we really set out to translate that into something through which investors can consider how they can align their portfolios to those goals. And we've had a number of working groups working through the past year and a half. And we have recently published a framework called the Net Zero Investment Framework, which is there to guide investors as to how to align their portfolios to the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And this really describes the first element of the work that we did, which was around definitions. And given the aim of the Paris Agreement to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, if possible, we have translated that into the goal of globally needing to reach net zero emissions by 2050, and therefore practically investors should be aligning their investment strategies with that level of emissions by 2050. And the other aspect that's key to the definition is that we encourage investors not just to decarbonize their portfolios and the assets within their portfolios, but also to think about how they can increase their allocations of investments towards the climate solutions, the green investment that we need to reach that goal. Because we know there are huge needs in terms of the technologies and interventions that are needed to deliver net zero, and scaling up that finance is really critical. In terms of the then translating that work, the framework describes a comprehensive set of actions that investors can take across their portfolio. So it looks at all of the levers really that investors have at their disposal. I would say at the core of that, it's really thinking about how investors can allocate capital to their assets or to assets and increase the alignment of those assets over time. This is done through a range of techniques: portfolio construction, engagement and stewardship with companies to influence the direction of those companies, and for those to decarbonize and invest in those climate solutions, and then looking at where divestment would be relevant. Across this, we provide recommendations for methodologies that investors can use to assess both the alignment of their portfolios at the portfolio level, but also how aligned individual assets and investments are to the Paris Agreement. Ultimately, we want all companies, all assets to be aligning to those net zero pathways, and therefore investors should be assessing that alignment before making decisions on whether and where to invest. And so we provide methodologies for that, as well as then how to transition a portfolio over time to more aligned assets and to increase investment in climate solutions. The framework also provides sort of a set of complementary actions, we should say, because we recognise that investors have a range of other levers. So it recommends that policy advocacy is aligned to, again, achieving that net zero goal. So investors should be influencing the direction of policy and governments, and using their voice to encourage those net zero consistent policies that we need to see, and for governments and public investment to be aligning to that goal as well. And also more generally influencing the market. So we know that a lot of the challenge that investors face in aligning portfolios to investing more in green is the data and products that they need to be able to do so. So it also encourages engagement with the market to address those problems. And at the core of the framework, there is a set of targets that we want investors to be meeting. So there's an overall portfolio emissions reduction target that they should be setting consistent with that net zero goal by 2050, and we recommend the approaches for doing that. We also want investors to be setting targets for increasing the proportion of their assets under management that are invested in assets that themselves are aligned, and that should be an increasing proportion of those over time to ensure, again, alignment of the underlying assets in the portfolio with net zero, as well as setting goals, as I mentioned, for increasing investment in climate solutions consistent with the needs for meeting net zero. So across a range of kind of goals and targets, investors will be measuring their alignment to that net zero goal. So that's a brief overview of the main content of the framework. I'll just speak a little bit about what we now see in terms of moving into implementation. So now that we have the framework, we are encouraging investors to set their commitments to net zero and to use the framework as a basis to guide that implementation, to take really effective action across those components and report and disclose on what they are doing in that regard. And so we're working with our members now in phase 2 of the Paris-aligned investment initiative to move towards implementation. I would also say there are areas of the framework we're developing in the next phase as well. So currently the framework only covers 4 asset classes, which are sovereign bonds, listed equity, corporate fixed income and real estate, and looking at how you measure alignment of those types of assets. But in the next phase, we'll be covering additional asset classes, so private equity and infrastructure, have a more comprehensive approach across a broader part of the investors' portfolios. And we'll also critically, and I think probably relevant to this group, be looking at how we encourage investors to align their investments with the adaptation and resilience goals of the Paris Agreement. We focus primarily on the temperature goal and therefore the mitigation side in phase 1 of our work, but we will be looking at how we can integrate achieving adaptation and resilience outcomes across the components of the framework that we have at the moment in phase 2, so that ahead of COP26 we produce a net zero resilient investment framework for investors to implement. And then the final part, as I say, is around sort of deepening the framework and doing some additional analysis on some critical areas that investors need to understand in terms of data, things like use of offsetting and more detailed elements of how you assess alignment that are really critical to making sure this is robust and science-based. So there'll be further work in that regard over the next year in phase 2 of the initiative. But I think we've been really delighted to see, and I think it was mentioned in one of the previous presentations, around a groundswell of private sector action towards aligning financial flows. And we've certainly seen that groundswell through this initiative from the beginning of the initiative, where we just had 3 or 4 of our asset owners come to us and say, we'd like to think about this question of how you align to Paris. We now have over 90 of our members, which is around 19 trillion of assets under management, working on this project to look at how they can align their portfolios, which I think really shows the potential scale and impact that frameworks like this can have in terms of providing that blueprint for investors to understand how to align portfolios, how to assess the alignment of assets and influence the direction of those assets towards aligning to the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we're looking forward to continuing to work with our members, other investors and wider stakeholders as we go forward implementing this process. I'll leave it there for now with an overview, but very happy to take any questions that the audience may have.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Strickland. And yeah, it's nice to see a familiar face. Okay, so well, from one familiar face to another one, the next in line is Mr. Rafael Jaschnik from the Environment Directorate at OECD. You have the floor. Thank you.
Hi, Vicky. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll quickly share screen if you don't mind. 1 second. I have just a couple of slides. Just, Vicky, tell me if you can see it properly.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So, hi, my name is Rafael Jaschnik. I sit in the Environment Directorate of the OECD. I'll just flag that today, as a contribution to the discussion, I'll focus on issues relating to measuring consistency or alignment. This means that I will not cover the depth and breadth of work that the OECD would have on this issue in relation to policies, instruments to make alignment happen, or for instance financial regulation and markets in relation to climate-related risk assessments and stress testing, for instance. That would be for another day. With the measurement question in mind, I'd just say that the perspective that we have here in the Environment Directorate of the OECD is that of climate policymakers and the alignment with climate policy goals, and that we very much ask the question of how do you try to measure that in a way at an aggregate level, which is a bit of a different perspective than what you would look into at the level of individual institutions. And I hope what I will cover now will hopefully nicely complement what Daisy just provided as well. The first thing I wanted to sort of say is that what we think is very important to keep in mind is that measuring alignment and consistency is different than measuring green or climate, in the sense that we need to find reference points, definitions, or inputs that not only help assess alignment, but also, perhaps even more importantly, misalignment. That is a very first important point that I just wanted to raise. The second one is something that I think has been touched upon already, but I want to stress is that it requires an economic-wide perspective where we do need to cover and address the financial sector, the private sector, and everything that Daisy just mentioned. But we shouldn't forget the real economy. That is where the direct climate impacts and effects are actually happening. And so we really need to think about both and the range of actors that are active in both and their interactions as well. And the third one is that there's a lot of different things to be thought about when we think about investments and financing activities. The first little icon talks about stocks and flows and how the two are interrelated, and we obviously need to sort of think about both. The second little icon refers to sources of funding in the sense that underpinning investments are a range of different financial instruments, financial actors, and all of that needs to be aligned. And in that sense, their alignment needs to be measured. At the end of the day, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. And that was just a little sort of mismatch. Sorry. And the third one is that alignment needs to happen, within countries in terms of domestic investments and very much so in international financing as well. So it's a wide coverage in that sense. The sort of quick thing I wanted to mention is that from our perspective, we try in the space of measuring alignment to try to gather the range of different actors across, again, real economy, financial sector, policymakers. We've had a workshop recently on that aspect, and we have a lot of material online available for those interested. But what I want to sort of quickly focus on over the next couple of minutes is our own research in this area, which we've decided for the time being to focus on real economy investment and the question of how to measure the alignment of real economy investment with climate objectives. In the sense that we see as a research gap compared to the wide range and depth of initiatives that are coming from the financial sector itself, and taking, like Daisy sort of covered, for instance, financial assets and portfolios as a starting point to the question of measuring alignment. We take it the other way around. We take real economy investments and assets as a starting point to the question of measuring alignment and try to make the two ends meet, so to say. So with that in mind, we've done to date 3 country pilots with Norway for their manufacturing industries, Latvia for their transport sector, and the UK in their building sector, looking at this question of how can we measure the climate consistency or alignment of investments in assets in those sectors. Just to give an order of magnitude, because we like to give them for the financial sector, we don't always recall them for the real economy. In terms of financial flows within the real economy, if we think about sort of perhaps relevant orders of magnitude to keep in mind, gross domestic product, 88 trillion in 2019. Gross fixed capital formation, which is pretty much the scope that I've just mentioned, relates to real economy investments in the sense of investments in assets, so to say, in real assets. And then within the 22 trillions that you see of investments, you've got what the IEA sort of estimates as annual investments in energy assets, which is just below 2 trillion. So if you think about sort of those real economy assets as being at the heart of locking in or reducing future greenhouse gas emissions, we can keep perhaps a 22 trillion figure in mind, and the need to align that with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So then just a quick couple of words on the findings from our work to date. To mention that there's really a number of steps that are required to complete a comprehensive assessment of alignment. You need investment data, obviously, and as a third party, as we are, this is not necessarily an easy thing to do compared to, for instance, the membership of Daisy's organization, in the sense that if you're an investor yourself, or if you're a corporation yourself, you have access to your portfolio data at a granular level. If you're trying to do this from an external perspective and trying to gather data across actors, it's quite a complex endeavor, actually. The second thing you need to do is you need to match the investment data with climate performance data. And there again, you need quite granular level information. And then once you've done that, you need to marry that with suitable reference points. And I go back a bit sort of to the idea that there you've got a trade-off between granularity, which is needed to evaluate the alignment of individual investments, and then aggregation, where you want to connect actually your assessment with higher level targets and objectives, whether at country level when we talk about carbon budgets, or the Paris alignment and the Paris temperature goal in itself. And in doing that, then there's what we've observed, probably very often, a need to refine, expand, and improve the available reference points, let it be scenarios, taxonomies, as I think have been mentioned earlier on, but taxonomies, we have them for green, we don't have them for misaligned. Or you could think about, also the performance thresholds and the targets that can be used as benchmarks for assessing what is aligned or what is misaligned. And that would lead us to some collaborative progress on comprehensive measurements. And finally, a couple of words on what we see as potential way forward and future improvements. So just to say that from our side, we're thinking about some replications for other sectors, other countries. We think that in terms of real economy assessments, there would be a need to do such work across countries, in particular to avoid issues related to carbon leakage effects and the underlying investments or divestments. And then probably look into simpler and more timely, less resource-intensive indicators to also, in the context of the current crisis, would be, badly needed. The other aspect, just to mention, is that there's a strong need, in our view, to connect, the assessments that are being made in the financial markets and by financial actors and financiers with the real economy assessments, such as the ones we're testing. And the core to that would be to explore the economic benefits of actually measuring and aligning with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And finally, because I think also the role of the biennial assessment and its 2.1c chapter is also to inform the future global stocktake, and that is sort of something that we're keeping in mind, being the OECD and having a cross-country perspective where we're thinking about the potential to institutionalize such measurement across countries, including potentially to inform the global stocktake if relevant, and to complement the types of indicators that we already have for other climate-related indicators. And I'll stop there for the sake of the discussion as well. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you, Raphael. It's, again, a very substantial discussion and a presentation that you give us. And I do hear a lot of the same words coming back, which but I won't mention it yet because I don't want to guide the discussion yet, not before we have our final speaker. I already see one question in the chat, but we will tackle that when we have the open discussion. So if we can go to our next speaker, which is Mr. Damien Navizet from the Agence Française de Développement. So, Monsieur Navizet, you have the floor.
Merci. Bonjour Vicky. Bonjour Chantal. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some experience on Article 2.1.c from development banks. My name is Damien Navizet. I'm the head of the climate change unit within the Agence Française de Développement and also the co-chair of the climate change working group of the IDFC, the International Development Finance Club. Next slide, please. Quite simply, this discussion is very timely, as next week on November 12th, there will be the first ever World Summit of all public development banks, and climate change will feature high on the agenda, including this now common topic of Paris alignment. But I'll take in turn these three steps in my presentation. Next slide, please. I thought it would be important to get some reference to the Paris Agreement itself, mainly to stress a few very important passages that bear strong significance to a public finance institution, with three main takeaway, of course. First, the reference to finance flows, all finance flows. And of course, for a development bank, it's an important word because we produce financial flows. But more to the point, we also have a leverage effect, a leverage role to private financial flows as well in the economies of our countries. Secondly, throughout the agreement, a strong reference to sustainable development and to country-driven strategies, and providing additional financial resources both for adaptation and mitigation. I think it's important to never forget that we also talk about resilience and not only about neutrality, of course. And lastly, a multiple references throughout the agreement to the long-term nature of the goals, meaning that in everything we do when we want to align with the Paris Agreement, we need to think also long-term, not only short-term. Next slide, please. So it's in that context that at the AFD in 2017, we received a formal mandate from our government to implement the Paris Agreement. And we devised a new strategy to take Paris Agreement into account in our activity, with one important goal of making our activity 100% compatible with the Paris Agreement. This comes in addition to a goal of having 50% of our yearly financial flows dedicated to climate co-benefits. So this Paris compatibility was defined as at least doing no harm, but also trying to contribute actively to the long-term transition. So doing no harm, there are mainly three criteria that we look on every project. That's the policy alignment in a country, and in particular with the NDC, and when they exist, the long-term strategies, of course. Secondly, the risk of locking in emissions in the long term. And thirdly, importantly, taking into account physical climate risk, not only the one happening today, but also the one which may happen in the long run as well. This is done through a specific project analysis grid, which is available online, and also a specific country-by-country analysis, because these things are always context-specific. Now, this year, 2020, we conducted a midterm review of this strategy. And in fact, to raise the ambition or to enhance the quality of what we're doing, we're happy that 3 years down the road today, there is this groundswell of the initiative which was referred by other speakers. And so we can see different approaches and see how they can be complementary. Like typically, our approach is a bottom-up approach, project by project, trying to avoid investing in a negative outcome investment. But at the same time, you have more like top-down approaches, trying to reflect at the level of the portfolio and to invent some metrics of alignment. And this is something we are trying to take on board as well. We are also finding it harder to assess the alignment of intermediated finance. Investing in a infrastructure project, it's easy, if you allow me this shortcut, compared to talking about the alignment of a credit line to a bank in a country. And also, a final important challenge is that if you want to align financial flows, then it implies a whole set of internal transformation within the financial institution. And this we're also going to take on board in the next years. Importantly, a point which probably you also all have noticed, there is a strong social component to the climate mitigation and adaptation transition that we need. I think it's embedded in the Paris Agreement as well. And with the COVID crisis at the moment, this is just inescapable. And we have to find in our climate solutions something that is also socially sustainable. Next slide, please. I'll end my speech on this slide on the IDFC. So I'm changing hats now. The IDFC is a group of 26 national and regional development banks. We have a member in Mexico, NAFIN. We had someone from Mexico earlier today, and also we have PTSMI from Indonesia. Out of the 26 banks, roughly 20 operate in the global south, and from the north, you have AFD, of course, and also KfW, for example, JICA from Japan, or CDP from Italy, just to give you a rough idea of who the IDFC are. So this collective has embarked on a journey to alignment with the Paris Agreement. If you followed the work of the MDBs, you will notice some similarity. Of course, this journey, which is at the top of the slide, was started together with the MDBs at the end of 2017 at the One Planet Summit, when we all collectively committed to align our financial flows with the Paris Agreement. Now, a year later, trying to flesh out what it means in concrete terms, At the same time as the MDB at COP24, we issued a position paper with 6 important elements to alignment. Of course, you'll find climate finance, always do more, good and green investment. Of course, it's not enough, you have to do less of the brown ones as well. Always consider adaptation and mitigation. Aim for transformative action which have a significance for public policy. Mobilize the private sector, of course. That's one of the core missions of the public development banks. And also this idea of internal transformations that are needed to achieve this. A year ago in New York, in September 2019, we took a set of climate commitments, including delivering $1 trillion of climate finance by 2025. But more to the point of this discussion today, we issued a study performed by CPI and I4C on what alignment can mean for the members of the IDFC, and they are very important idea. First, the thing that alignment is about scope, so it's about looking at your entire portfolio, not only the green part, but also the less green part. Secondly, the time frame is long term, so importantly, not focus on the rate of return or the emissions in 5 years or 10 years, but look ahead. Thirdly, the scale of impact. This is the same thing as doing no harm, but also trying to transform the system. And this needs to be done, taken on board by the bank in its strategy, in its operations, but also with a view to having a demonstration impact on the public policy. Now, where we stand at the moment, I told you that next week there is this Finance in Common Summit gathering all the development banks. So the IDFC will make a strong statement on alignment next week. We won't be the only ones, of course, but more concretely, we will announce, much as the MDBs or much as the previous speakers referred to, the need now to come with concrete tools, approaches for alignment. The banks must be helped, I guess, in choosing the approaches that are right for them. A public bank is different from a private bank. An investor is different from a creditor, etc., etc. Throughout this, we have said that Article 2.1.c was the guidepost of this journey. And we hope that we can exchange with other financial institutions to together and collectively get a better sense of where we're heading. Thank you so much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Damien. I think again, a lot of information that is very interesting to have. So I mean, just as an attempt to give a very brief summary before giving the floor to my co-facilitator who will open the discussion, the main points or the main elements I can hear again is, I mean, overall the aspects and all the different views, both by countries and by organizations, is that it comes down to coordination and cooperation. I mean, we've heard saying that we speak a lot, because it's such a new item, if you allow me to say that, we speak different languages, and that we need to make sure that we are actually understanding each other, and therefore we need the standardization and the definitions and making sure that it's all consistent. But it all comes down to implementation of it. I mean, we can't stay stuck in methodologies. It also needs to be implemented. And I really want to thank all of the speakers of providing such good examples of how you are tackling all these issues. And as a final two concepts that I heard a lot was, it's the context of climate change is broad, and it also requires that we have the opportunity to look at it from the different aspects that are relevant for those who are actually implementing it. So it has to do with sustainability for many people. It's also related to resilience and disaster risk resilience in that aspect. So I mean, I just wanted to give you those keywords that I heard throughout all the different presentations. And now I would very happy give the floor to Saini to actually open up the discussion. Good afternoon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Vicky, and good afternoon, everyone. I was finally able to leave Europe and be back on the African continent. So it was a bit busy. Happy to the question that we prepared for the discussions. And the first one is on the role of government in supporting indeed the achievement of the goal expressed in Article 2, paragraph 1.c. So it's both the low emission or the mitigation target as well as the adaptation target of the Paris Agreement, and how can government support that? Best example, ongoing initiatives and activities which are relevant to achieve that, and finally common approaches. But again, those are just guiding questions at this stage. We're more than interested to hear your views. This is a very exploratory field, so we are more than interested to hear your views, opinion, perspectives on this. So on that, and I open the floor. So are any hands raised? Secretariat, can you help me with that?
Yes, I believe Nancy from EIB has her hand raised.
All right, so let's give Nancy the floor then.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much for giving me the floor. I am going to give you a bit of information about what the EIB is doing, the European Investment Bank. For those of you that don't know me, I am the Chief Climate Change Expert of the EIB, but I was also asked by the Secretariat if I could give a very quick update on where the MDBs are on their Paris Alignment Framework work. And I know you've had plenty of presentations and explanations, and Damien from AFD just mentioned how this all started some years ago together with IDFC, and we indeed, the MDBs, launched our 6 building block framework at COP24. At the last COP, we had a number of both closed and open side events to discuss with many different players on the implementation and the common tools and methodologies we were putting in place, and we've been working on that all year. What I wanted to inform you about is that, as well as giving an update at the Finance in Common Summit, which is being organized next week, of all the world's development institutions, development banks, we are also hosting a webinar on Monday to give on next Monday, the 10th, to give an update on our progress, highlight some of the challenges we found, because as a number of people have said, the proof of the pudding is in the doing in this case. And when you start doing it, you find that there's a lot of things you still don't know. There's a lot of complications, but you have to keep going and working out how to solve them. And the MDBs have been doing that. And so I'm afraid I'm not right now, I'm on an iPad. I cannot share it, but I will share it with the Secretariat, the invitation for the webinar on Monday. And as I said, we will also be giving an update at the high-level event on climate change at Finance in Common. Turning quickly to the EIB, was one of the MDBs. We've been working on Paris alignment within the framework of the MDB 6 building blocks. We were one of the MDBs who sort of initiated this work. And as you may know, in New York in 2018, our president already said that he was confident that by implementing our 2015 to 2020 climate strategy, we would ensure the alignment of with the Paris Agreement of all of our activities by the end of 2020. At that time, it sounded like we had plenty of time. But it's a lot of work when you start doing that inside a very large organization. And as AFD pointed out, it's really a transformation of the organization. I want to highlight that last year, our board in November approved not only an increase in our climate finance target. In fact, we are moving to climate action and environmental sustainability in support of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan, which was reported on by Caroline Wellmans earlier. So we will be moving to 50%, more than 50% by 2025, but will still very largely remain climate finance. There are many other parts of that decision, but one of the most important parts of the decision last November was that our board approved that we should align all of our financing activities with the goals and principles of the Paris Agreement by the end of 2020. And we've been working flat out. I don't think there is any activity that has pulled together every single part of the EIB group in such a way as this. Really, absolutely every part of the group. It has created climate champions everywhere. And I'm very proud to tell you that the draft Climate Bank Roadmap has, at very short notice, been published 2 hours ago on the bank's website, ahead of the board decision on it, which is due on the 11th of November. It was decided to put it on the bank's website. And again, I wish I could send you the link, but I suspect if you Google eib.org climate or roadmap, you will find it. It is a draft. It has been sent to our board and they will make their decision on it on the 11th. But it lays out how we are addressing Paris alignment in our lending, managing the risks, which is an important part, we believe, of Paris alignment in all of our work in our existing portfolio, our work with our clients. It also looks at the social angle, the just transition in its widest sense. It looks at the need for addressing the inherent inequality in climate change and therefore the need to proactively address that in the social response. It looks at our internal activities. It looks at how we are going to support our clients, because ultimately, of course, it is not the EIB or any other MDB that has to decarbonize or become more resilient. It is, in fact, all of our clients, whether they are countries or corporates or banks. And it explains how all different types of financing, from the direct financing of big infrastructure through to funds and credit lines, and also what I think is important is the EIF, which is the European Investment Fund, which is also part of the EIB group. So I won't go on anymore, but just to commend it to you. You may think we should have done more in some areas, or you think maybe we've done too much, but I can assure you that we have tried to address every part of Paris alignment in every part of the EIB group. And as I say, it was just published about 2 hours ago. Thank you.
Sani, I believe you're still muted.
Thank you, Nancy. I was congratulating EIB for the publication. I haven't had a chance to look at it. Definitely do that. Do we have someone else?
Yes, Jan Willem from EBRD.
All right.
Hi, Sani.
Oh, Jan, good to see you. Good to see you.
Good seeing you. Yes, hello. Let's say I discussed this with the secretary before, but let's say we had a very busy week, also because we're all working on the Paris Agreement alignment questions and methodologies, etc. But I had a slightly technical notion. I think we also need to put in the discussion on Article 2.1c and the alignment questions, which is the impact of Article 6. As you know, Article 6 is still a bit under discussion, but there is an Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, which will have impact on carbon budgets on either side of country borders, etc., which then may affect assessments on whether an investment is Paris aligned or not. And I think that question has not been explored yet sufficiently, but I think we need to add it, because it will start to kind of interfere with the climate finance question. Not with the climate finance question, with the assessment on Paris alignment, etc. So I just want to bring that notion into the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks. We'll keep that one up. alignment, articles is brought into the picture. Anyone else and any other request?
We have Aram from Mexico.
All right.
Hi, thank you. Regarding question, the role of the government in supporting the achievement of the goal expressed in Article 2, I would like to highlight the importance of the government to generate planning processes that could engage the public, both the public and private sector, to unlock and scale up investment that could address the particularly vulnerable sectors, population, and ecosystems. And also the importance of enhance the roles of national designated authorities or focal points of the funds to engage, understand, and communicate the specific needs of the recipients and actors that are involved in climate finance that could lead to focalized that could lead to focalized actions. Thank you.
No, thanks for the concrete suggestions on that. Definitely an innovative way for NDAs. Is that GCF NDAs or funds NDA, as well as the necessary public intervention. Any other request?
We don't see any other requests, but I wonder if we could check if Raphael could come back to the question in the chat from Jan Willem and EBRD about whether there's this dynamic notion of consistency, how that can be taken account of.
I'm sure Raphael would love that. Raphael?
Yeah, I'm here. I just didn't see the question. Sorry. Give me 1 minute. Where's the can you read out the question?
Sorry,
Paddy,
yes.
Can you read?
Sorry, yes, it says, due to Paris Agreement Article 6, carbon budgets will be variable. How do you analyze this dynamic?
Yeah, I think assessment. This is something that we're barely testing at this stage. So at some point, when you assess consistency at point X, you assess it with the carbon budget that is being set or that is currently available. I think what I can tell you from the work we've been doing, with the UK at the moment is that the UK has carbon budgets that are being updated every couple of years with underlying scenarios. They tend to become more ambitious with time. And so I think what was aligned with previous UK carbon budgets, according to what we've looked at in terms of, again, marrying investments with sort of the underlying or the carbon budgets at the national level, I think, what we see is that they tend to become less and less aligned over time if you take increasingly ambitious sort of carbon budgets. So I think that links to the perspective, I think, that Damien was mentioning in his intervention, saying that no matter how you turn this around, when you assess or think about alignment today, you need to take a very long-term perspective, because you might be aligned with a short-term target that is not aligned with a longer-term 2050 net zero perspective. So that's I guess, one comment. The other comment I would make on carbon budgets is that it's a major issue of method that I think everybody is facing. We faced it in our work, and I think investors and banks and everybody or corporates who are trying to look at their individual investments are facing, which is that scenarios or carbon budgets are typically set at the level of countries, sectors, but very rarely, and sectors I'm still being quite optimistic, and very rarely at level of subsectors or at a granular enough level that would enable you to match investment decisions and actual investment made with those carbon budgets. So that's again, if we go into points of method a bit, that's another issue that I would throw in if we discuss carbon budgets in addition to the issue of dynamic and changing, getting more ambitious over time, I guess, which again links to longer term sort of perspective in the assessment that you make today.
Thank you, Raphael. Good to see you. Any other requests? Vicky, do you want to say something as well before I wrap up? Do we have anything else?
I think, it's just, again, digestion of all the information that we're receiving. So I do just want to thank everybody of giving such good examples of what is happening at this point. And I don't envy Chantal, who has to try to put that all into one chapter. But yeah, no, I'm happy to go into the weekend.
Thanks, Vicky, and of course, thanks everyone. I've only unfortunately joined the last part. But this is a very complex. We'll take that into consideration when in moving the report forward, and would really want to encourage all of you to continue working with us. If you have inputs in whatever format, please send it formally, informally, through the secretariat, or when we have calls. But by all means, continue engaging and sharing what you have. And thanks for the continued support and participation. This is quite exciting. Thanks. And bon weekend. Happy enjoy your weekend. Vicky, you also wanted to say something?
No, I just want to thank you as well, and thanks to the Secretary for ensuring such good speakers on all webinars and doing all the efforts there. So thank you, and yeah, bon weekend.
Yes, thank you to the Secretariat enjoying rainy Bonn. Thanks.